Chapter 6. What Remains. In a little used corner of the Ministry Archive vault, deep inside a seldom visited nook of the Wizarding Archive, two shelves stood labeled Foreign Maladies 1850 to 1950. The room was quiet, dusty, and dimly lit, the sort of place most witches and wizards had long since forgotten existed. Hermione Granger moved carefully between the shelves with her cloak pulled close around her. She had no wand out, but her attention was fixed on the old books and files in her hands. Historic texts, reports, and clippings had been stacked around her in uneasy piles. She turned one page after another, studying old illustrations of people transforming into animals, then into plants, and finally into things that seemed neither one nor the other. One image showed a body broken into sections, as though the transformation itself had fractured into separate forms. Hermione frowned. "That's not transformation," she whispered. "It's fragmentation." As she said it, something moved across the page. A vine crept over the parchment, and the ink beneath it seemed to shift in response. Hermione stepped back at once, her eyes narrowing. "What don't you want me to find?" she said softly. Then she pulled back her hood. The researcher in the archive was Hermione Granger, Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic. Her gaze dropped to a file opened on the desk before her. It concerned a maledictus case involving a witch named Polyglass. Hermione reached down and turned the page with great care. In the margin of the file, there was a note in cramped handwriting explaining that the curse had once been freed from its original host after that host was murdered. Aurors had tracked it, only to discover that the curse had split into pieces. Over time, the fragments had found their way back toward one another and eventually infected Polyglass. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in small, harsh script, "Can't kill. It must choose death." Hermione stared at the note for a long moment. Then more vines began to creep across the pages. They wound over the files, pushing at her hands and creeping closer until she was forced backward out of the room. The door closed behind her, leaving her standing in the corridor outside, deep in thought. In a private room at the Auror office, Harry, Ron, Neville, and Ginny were gathered with Gawain Robards and several temporary staff members. The mood had grown tense. They had all spent the last month collecting reports, comparing cases, and trying to force a shape onto something that still refused to make sense. Gawain leaned over the table, frustration showing in the tightness of his jaw. "It's not Yaxley," he said. "If it's residual magic, it's strong." Harry looked up from the notes in front of him. "We suspect a maledictus curse." Gawain raised his brows, interested despite himself. Harry went on, carefully. "It's trying to become whole." Neville, who had been quiet until then, looked down at the table and added, "And it thinks I can help it." Before anyone could answer, Hermione entered the room. She looked tired, worn down, and faintly angry in the way she sometimes did when she had spent too long among old books and not nearly enough among sensible people. "I've been going through everything I can find on maledictus curses," she said. "The maledictus curse is a linear living curse that grows within the host until it takes over and dies." She paused, glancing around the room to make sure they were following. "There are rare cases where the transformation is interrupted." Ron looked up at once. "Interrupted how?" Hermione's voice grew quieter, violently. "By powerful magic or death." The room went still. "If you want answers," Hermione continued, "you won't find them in standard ministry records. You need the foreign ministry archives, obscure cases, old reports." Ron frowned. "How do you know that?" Hermione gave him a tired look. "Because there have been no maledictus cases in England for the last 150 years. The last one was Polyglass. It was a strange case. Aurors at the time killed a maledictus they mistook for a cursed beaver." Ron blinked. "A cursed beaver?" Hermione ignored him and kept going. "But if a maledictus is killed or cursed before the transformation is complete, the curse can infect another host. One of the Aurors understood that and tried to track it down to destroy it, but the curse had split into pieces. That made it impossible to follow." She took a breath and continued. "Years later, it reemerged, reassembled itself, and infected a young girl named Polyglass. That's all the file says, except for one handwritten note in the margin. You can't kill it. It must choose death." She looked toward the shelf-lined archive behind her. "That was as far as I got before the plants in the ministry archives persuaded me to leave." Ron stood at once and stepped closer. "What happened?" Hermione ignored the question, reached into her shoulder bag, and with some effort pulled out 2 boxes full of old ministry files. "I was able to get these out, though," she said. "You're not dealing with dark magic in the usual sense. You're dealing with something that was never resolved." She turned toward the door. "Hope that helps." Then she left. For a moment, no one said anything. At last, Gawain looked after her and said quietly, "Who was that?" Ron, Harry, and Neville exchanged a glance, and despite everything, smiled. Harry opened the first box and began handing files to Ron and Neville. They spent the next while working through maledictus cases from across history, reports of curses that spread, transformed, fractured, or destabilized in strange and violent ways. The more they read, the clearer it became that these cases were not random. They were all different expressions of the same broken process. Neville came across one file in particular and stopped. "It says here," Ron said, taking it from him, "that the curse kept trying to reform the original state." Harry looked at Neville. "That's what we're seeing. But how do we stop it? Neville did not answer. Instead, he reached into the box and his fingers brushed against one of the files. The moment he touched it, something passed through him like an electric shock. His vision changed. He saw a woman transforming into a snake, but the transformation was incomplete and wrong. She was frightened, confused. The process itself seemed to be tearing at her. Then, the snake form completed its change, and Neville knew at once what he was seeing. Nagini. Nagini was a maledictus. As soon as that realization struck him, the image shifted. The human form stood before him now, young and beautiful, but not monstrous, not angry, just lost. Nagini looked at him and said softly, "Help me remember." Neville blinked and snapped back into the room, shaken. "This is it," he said to the others. Nagini was a maledictus. The room fell silent. Neville looked at Harry and Ron, and for the first time, he said it out loud. "I've been hearing the whispers, the voices. I've been seeing her." He swallowed. "She's not trying to come back as a monster. It's trying to come back as herself." The others turned back to the file. It was sparse and incomplete, but it had given them something they had not had before. A name, a time, and a place. The curse had been released in the Battle of Hogwarts when Neville Longbottom killed Nagini. Ron contacted Hermione through the comm coins and asked her to come back. She returned to the Auror office not long after, looking as though she had never really left the archive behind. Harry and Ron filled her in on Neville's discovery, and as she listened, her expression shifted. "If this spell is indeed trying to reform itself," she said slowly, "there's no guarantee what state it will return in." "You mean it could be dangerous?" Harry asked. Hermione nodded. "It could be unstable." At that moment, Gawain heard a noise in the hall. He stepped out to see what was happening, and returned a moment later looking alarmed. The office was suddenly alive with owls. Reports were flooding in from everywhere. Multiple cases of plants, animals, water, and fire causing disturbances. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Neville. The same thought seemed to move through them all at once. "We still don't know how to stop it," Harry said. Neville's face had gone very still. "It's consolidating," he said. Gawain drew a deep breath, panic beginning to show at last. "You three keep working the case," he said. "We need to find all the lost pieces of the curse and end this. It's getting out of hand. I made a mistake ordering the purge. I acted too quickly." He looked briefly ashamed, then pushed on. "I'm on damage control now. Find the location of the curses. Miss Granger, could you inform the minister of your findings and the situation here?" And with that, he hurried off to deal with the reports pouring in from every direction. That night, Neville went into the water closet in the Auror office and splashed cold water over his face. He looked up into the mirror and shut his eyes. The world went dark, then bright, empty. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer alone. Nagini stood before him in the reflection, young, beautiful, and calm. She did not seem threatening. She simply waited. Neville looked at her for a long moment and then said quietly, "I can't let you hurt anyone." Nagini's face changed almost imperceptibly, as though what she felt was not anger but something close to sadness. "I don't want to," she said. "I just don't want to be this anymore."